There comes a moment in every heart when Allah gently whispers, "Wake up, my servant. Your life is passing and your purpose is calling." And sometimes that reminder arrives in the simplest of phrases: don't sleep before evening, not because your body doesn't need rest, but because your soul deserves awakening. Every evening is a meeting point with destiny, a sacred pause where the believer stands between what is past and what is coming. Before your eyes close, your heart must open to reflection, repentance, gratitude, and intention. For the Prophet taught us that the believer's day is not complete until the nafs has been aligned, the heart has returned to Allah, and the soul has washed itself in remembrance. So tonight, as we speak about this powerful principle, let your heart stay present, because behind the words "don't sleep before evening" lies a deeper truth. A believer does not rest until their soul has risen. The believer must remain spiritually awake until evening to reflect on their day. This truth stretches far beyond the physical act of keeping one's eyes open. It is a calling that echoes in the chambers of the heart, urging the soul to rise above distraction and reclaim its purpose. In a world where hours pass quietly and unnoticed, where moments slip through fingers like grains of sand, the believer is reminded to pause before evening and look inward. Every day is a page written by your choices, your intentions, your slips, your victories, and the silent battles no one sees. And evening is the time when that page asks to be read. The soul needs that reading. It needs that moment of honesty. It needs that confrontation with truth, not to shame or punish, but to awaken, to redirect, to soften what has hardened, and to heal what is quietly breaking beneath the surface. Life has a way of carrying us swiftly, pulling us from one task to another, from one responsibility to the next, until we forget that each breath is a divine trust. The body may rush through the day, but the heart cannot afford to. The heart must stay present. The instruction to not sleep before evening is a mercy from Allah, reminding the believer to pause before night closes in. For the hours before evening hold a spiritual weight that many overlook. They are hours where your deeds gather around you, silently waiting for your acknowledgement. They are hours where your heart is more open, more reflective, more capable of returning to Allah with sincerity. When you stay awake until evening, you are not just resisting physical sleep, you are choosing awareness over heedlessness, consciousness over drifting, presence over numbness. You are choosing to honor the journey of your soul, not just the demands of your body. The believer understands that the soul has its own rhythm, its own language, its own needs. It hungers not for food or rest, but for meaning, for truth, for alignment with the one who created it. And the hours before evening provide the space for that nourishment. They invite you to reconnect with your purpose, to recenter your heart. After a day spent navigating the noise of the world, the heart grows weary too, not from labor, but from forgetfulness. Forgetfulness is its heaviness, but remembrance is its oxygen. When you remain spiritually awake until evening, you give your heart the breath it needs to survive another day. You allow yourself to step back and ask, where did my heart wander today? Where did it remain firm? Where did it fall? Where did it rise? These questions are not judgments. They are gateways to growth. They are invitations from Allah to come closer, one sincere reflection at a time. The believer who reflects before evening carries a light within them, a light born not from perfection, but from awareness. Awareness is the foundation of spiritual transformation. It is the moment the heart turns inward and whispers, "I want to return." And Allah loves the heart that returns. He loves the heart that pauses before the world falls silent and seeks His presence. He loves the heart that doesn't allow the day to end without remembering where it came from and where it is going. Staying awake until evening is choosing to honor this divine relationship. It is choosing to let your heart speak before sleep steals your awareness. For once sleep comes, the page of that day is sealed. You cannot rewrite it. You cannot add to it. You cannot correct it. You can only look at it once it becomes part of your past. So pause before evening, return before evening, reflect before evening, hold your day in your hands before you hand it over to tomorrow. The believer must recognize that each evening is a gift, a mercy, a doorway. It is the time Allah gives you to realign your spirit before the night descends. Just as the sky shifts from gold to deep blue, your heart is invited to shift from distraction to remembrance. The hours before evening soften the soul. They remind you that today is temporary, that mistakes are temporary, that burdens are temporary, but your return to Allah is eternal. When you stay spiritually awake until evening, you are declaring that you do not want this day to pass without learning from it. You do not want this day to end with your heart asleep while your body rests. You do not want to drift through life unaware of the path your soul is taking. You want to know where you stand with Allah, even if the answer humbles you. The believer understands that humility is not weakness. Humility is the strength that anchors the heart. Reflection before evening cultivates humility because it forces the heart to see itself clearly. It brings forth gratitude for what Allah helped you accomplish and repentance for what you fell short in. Gratitude and repentance are the wings of the believer. One lifts you upward, the other brings you back to the ground. Together, they keep you balanced on the path to Allah. Without reflection, gratitude fades and repentance becomes distant. The heart becomes heavy and lost. But when you pause before evening, the heart finds its way again. It regains its clarity, its softness, its longing. Reflection is a form of worship, a silent conversation between you and the one who created you. And evening is the most intimate time for that conversation. During the day, the world demands your attention. Work, responsibilities, people, noise, movement, they all pull your senses outward. But before evening, Allah calls your senses inward. He calls your heart back home. He asks it to sit with itself, to witness itself, to acknowledge its truth. This witnessing is not easy. It requires honesty. It requires vulnerability. It requires courage. But the believer is courageous not because they are fearless, but because they trust Allah more than they fear their own reflection. They trust that facing their truth will draw them closer to Him. They trust that confronting their shortcomings will purify them. They trust that returning to Allah before evening will give their soul the peace it seeks. Many people sleep through their lives even while they are awake. They move, work, speak, and interact, but their hearts are asleep. They are disconnected from their purpose, unaware of their spiritual state, blind to the reality of their soul. This is the sleep that the believer must fear. This is the sleep that the instruction warns against. When you stay awake until evening, you are actively fighting this sleep. You are choosing to live intentionally, not passively. You are choosing to walk through your day with awareness of your heart. You are choosing to end your day with clarity instead of confusion. This is what gives the believer strength. Not worldly power, not physical endurance, but spiritual awareness. Awareness is the lamp that lights the path of faith. Without it, even the brightest days become dark. The believer must remain spiritually awake until evening because the state of your heart at sunset often shapes the state of your heart at sunrise. When you reflect before evening, you carry peace into the night. When you neglect reflection, you carry heaviness into the night. The soul feels the difference. It carries its weight into the next day. This is why the hours before evening are so critical. They determine the emotional and spiritual tone of your night. They determine the tone of your prayer, your rest, your dreams, and often your next morning. Reflection is not a small act. It is a daily purification. It is the believer's way of returning to themselves before they return to their Lord. The world teaches people to focus on productivity, accomplishments, and outward results, but faith teaches the believer to focus on the heart. What did your heart do today? That is the real question. Did it grow closer to Allah or drift further away? Did it speak truth or fall silent? Did it soften in remembrance or harden in forgetfulness? These questions cannot be answered while rushing. They require the stillness that arrives before evening. They require the quiet moments where you sit alone with your soul. The believer knows that this stillness is necessary. Without it, the heart becomes a stranger to itself. Without it, the believer becomes a stranger to Allah. Remaining spiritually awake until evening is also an act of protection. During the day, the heart encounters many things. Some beautiful, some painful, some distracting, some harmful. Reflection before evening allows you to cleanse your heart of what does not belong. It allows you to release what burdens you and hold on to what benefits you. It allows you to untangle the knots of your emotions and straighten the path of your intentions. This cleansing is vital, for an uncluttered heart is one that can easily recognize truth. It is one that can hear guidance. It is one that can receive peace. When you stay spiritually awake until evening, you protect yourself from carrying unnecessary wounds into the night. You protect your heart from sleeping in heaviness. The believer must understand that every evening is a reminder of the ultimate evening, the evening of life, the moment when the final sunset arrives. No one knows when that sunset will come, so the daily evening becomes a rehearsal, a gentle reminder, a compassionate warning. It asks you to reflect while you still can, to return while the door is open, to seek forgiveness while the chance remains. Death is the ultimate sleep, and staying awake until evening is a symbol of not wanting to meet that final moment in spiritual blindness. It is your way of saying, I want to return to you with a heart that is awake. This desire is beloved to Allah. It is honored by Him. It is rewarded by Him. Even the smallest reflection is seen by Him. When the believer remains spiritually awake until evening, they live a life of intention. They live a life where each day has meaning. They live a life where time is not wasted but transformed. Reflection breaks the cycle of heedlessness. It breaks the cycle of emotional numbness. It breaks the cycle of spiritual stagnation. It brings life back into the heart. It brings clarity back into the mind. It brings purpose back into the soul. The believer does not want to sleepwalk through life. They want to live with depth. They want to live with awareness. They want to live with a heart that is connected to the one who created it. To remain spiritually awake until evening is to honor the sacredness of time. Time is one of the greatest blessings Allah has given. It is also one of the most easily wasted. Reflection protects your time. It transforms your hours into moments of worship. It transforms your mistakes into lessons. It transforms your struggles into elevation. When you pause before evening, you are acknowledging that this day was a gift. You are acknowledging that your soul deserves attention. You are acknowledging that life is too precious to pass through without awareness. And so the believer must remain spiritually awake until evening to reflect on their day, to protect their heart, to purify their intentions, to return to Allah with sincerity, to understand themselves deeply, to break the cycle of heedlessness, to cultivate gratitude and repentance, to honor the journey of their soul, to walk through each day with awareness, to embrace the sacredness of time, to stay connected to their purpose, to nourish their heart with remembrance, to shape the state of their night and the tone of their next morning, to awaken the soul before the body rests, to allow the heart to breathe before sleep takes over, to sit in the quiet companionship of Allah before the world grows silent, to witness their own truth with courage, to rise, to return, to reflect, to remember, to remain spiritually awake until evening. Evening is a divine checkpoint that invites the soul to return to Allah before rest. It arrives quietly, softly, without demanding anything from you, yet holding everything you need. The sun begins to lower itself into the horizon, and the world around you shifts into a slower rhythm, signaling that something sacred has arrived. This time, before night fully covers the earth, is not just a natural transition. It is a spiritual appointment, a moment placed by Allah Himself, designed to call your heart back to the one who created it. There is a reason why the heart feels something at sunset, why there is a subtle awareness that the day is ending and a new kind of accountability begins. This is because evening is not just the closing of the day, it is the opening of self-reflection. It is the mirror through which you look at your soul and ask what it carried, what it gained, what it lost, and where it wandered in the hours that have passed. Throughout the day, people move through responsibilities, pressures, noise, expectations, and countless distractions. They wake up with intentions, sometimes strong and clear, sometimes weak and faltering. They try, they struggle, they succeed, they fail. Every day holds its own story. But Allah, in His mercy, gives the believer a designated moment before rest. a sacred checkpoint where you can pause before the page of your day closes. Evening is that checkpoint. It protects you from letting the day slip into oblivion without learning from it, without growing through it, without returning to Allah from it. The world might see sunset as simply the end of daylight, but the believer sees it as a divine invitation, an invitation to come back to the one who never left, even when your heart wandered far. This moment is a moment of spiritual clarity. As the sun descends, so too do the illusions that distract the heart. The noise of the world softens, the pace slows, the ego becomes quieter, even the sky becomes reflective, painted in colors that remind you of transitions, endings, rebirths, and the passage of time. It is a reminder that nothing is permanent, not your struggles, not your joys, not your mistakes, and not your accomplishments. The only thing that remains is your return to Allah. Evening whispers to the heart, come back, come closer, come home. It gives you a chance to reconnect, to realign, to reawaken. This divine checkpoint is an act of mercy because without pause, the heart becomes numb. Without reflection, the soul becomes heavy. Without returning to Allah, life becomes a repeating cycle without depth, meaning, or direction. People can rush through their days, believing they are moving forward, yet inside they are spiritually still, or worse, spiritually drifting. But evening stops you gently and gives you a moment to ask yourself whether the direction of your day was genuinely leading you closer to Allah or further away. This is a question no one else can answer for you. It is a conversation between you and your Creator, held in the quiet of your heart, and evening is the time designed for that conversation. Evening reminds you that every action of your day will testify for you or against you. It is the checkpoint where you review, not with fear, but with honesty. It is the checkpoint where you ask, did I guard my tongue? Did I guard my eyes? Did I guard my intentions? Did I allow my heart to be pulled into emptiness? Did I reach out to someone in need? Did I show gratitude? Did I remember Allah? Did I pray with presence or only with movement? These are not questions meant to overwhelm, but to guide. They are questions that reveal the state of your soul. They are questions that protect you from repeating mistakes and help you build consistency in goodness. There is a divine wisdom in reflecting before rest. When you reflect at evening, your sleep becomes more peaceful because your heart has been emptied of the burdens that accumulated throughout the day. The anxieties, regrets, confusions, and emotional clutter begin to dissolve when they are brought into the light of reflection. By returning to Allah before sleep, you give your heart permission to release what weighs it down. You give your soul the freedom to breathe. You give your mind the clarity to rest properly. Sleep that arrives after reflection is not just rest for the body, it is healing for the soul. Evening also carries a sense of accountability that is unique. It reminds you that just as your day is ending, so too will your life end one day. The sunset is a daily reminder of the greater sunset that awaits every soul. This is not meant to frighten but to awaken. Just as a believer pauses before the close of the day, they must prepare before the close of their life. Evening teaches you that endings are invitations to beginnings, and that reflection is the bridge between what was and what can be. When you use evening as a spiritual checkpoint, you prepare your soul to meet its Lord with awareness, humility, and hope. There is a spiritual softness in the time before evening prayer. The world slows down, and the heart becomes more receptive. It becomes easier to access sincerity because the noise of the day begins to fade. The ego, which may have been strong throughout the day, is quieter. The heart becomes more honest. That honesty is the key to spiritual transformation. When you come to Allah with honesty in the evening, even small moments of reflection become acts of worship. Even small moments of repentance become openings to divine mercy. Even small moments of gratitude become doors to greater blessings. Allah created time with wisdom. Every moment has its purpose. Morning is a beginning, midday is perseverance, and evening is reflection. To ignore the purpose of evening is to miss out on one of the greatest opportunities for spiritual growth. Evening strengthens the believer because it teaches consistency. Reflection every evening softens the heart daily, not just occasionally. It creates a pattern of awakening that prevents spiritual blindness. It teaches the soul to pause, to think, to feel, to return. It makes self-awareness a habit rather than an exception. And when self-awareness becomes a habit, the heart becomes alive. Evening is the checkpoint where illusions fade and truths emerge. It is where the masks you wore throughout the day fall away. It is where the soul speaks more clearly. It is where you face yourself not as the world sees you, but as Allah sees you. And in that moment of truth, even the smallest reflection becomes an act of courage, because facing yourself requires bravery. Returning to Allah requires humility. But both courage and humility are qualities Allah loves in His servants. This divine checkpoint is also a moment of gratitude. When you pause before evening, you realize how many blessings you lived today without even noticing. The breath that entered your lungs without your command. The steps you took without difficulty. The food that nourished you. The moments you laughed. The dangers Allah protected you from without your awareness. The opportunities you were given. The comfort you sat in. Gratitude grows when you reflect. And gratitude is a form of worship. When evening arrives, your heart has the chance to recognize what was invisible earlier. This recognition softens you and draws you closer to Allah. Reflection before evening also protects the believer from arrogance. When you reflect on your day, you remember that your successes were not because of you alone. They were because Allah allowed them. Your good deeds were not your greatness, but His guidance. Your talents, your opportunities, your abilities, your strength, they were all gifts, not accomplishments born from your own power. Reflection humbles you, and humility is the soil in which faith flourishes. But evening also opens the door to repentance. Every believer falls, every believer makes mistakes, every believer forgets. But what separates the spiritually living from the spiritually asleep is the ability to return. Evening is the time when returning becomes easier because the heart is softer. The believer is not asked to be perfect, they are asked to be sincere. The door of repentance is always open, but evening makes it wider. When you reflect before rest, your repentance becomes deeper, more heartfelt, more present. This is the kind of repentance that changes you, not simply excuses you. Evening is a checkpoint because accountability without harshness is mercy. Allah knows the weakness of the human being. He knows the struggles you face. He knows the weight you carry. He knows how easily the world distracts your heart. And so He gives you sunset, a moment where you can stop without fear, a moment where you can look inward without despair, a moment where you can return without feeling unworthy. Evening is the time when Allah invites you to remember that He is always near. And that nearness becomes clearer when the noise of the day settles. There is also a psychological wisdom in this divine checkpoint. The mind processes the day differently when reflecting before evening. It finds closure, it finds understanding, it finds structure. Many anxieties come from unresolved thoughts. Depression often grows from unexpressed emotions. Stress often comes from unexamined experiences. Evening reflection prevents the accumulation of these burdens. It keeps the heart light. It keeps the mind clear. It keeps the soul steady. This is why spiritual practices often have psychological benefits. The creator of the soul knows what the soul needs. Evening teaches the believer that spiritual progress is not found only in big moments, but in small daily practices. The consistent act of returning to Allah before rest builds a foundation of faith that is unshakable. It strengthens you in ways you may not notice immediately, but over time your heart transforms. You become calmer, more self-aware, more grateful, more humble, more connected. You begin to see the world differently. You begin to respond to life differently. You begin to understand yourself more deeply. This is the power of evening reflection. It changes you quietly, consistently, and profoundly. Evening is a checkpoint that belongs only to you and Allah. No one else can stand in that moment for you. No one else can reflect on your day. No one else can return on your behalf. This intimacy is sacred. It is a reminder that your relationship with Allah is personal, unique, and direct. Evening strengthens that relationship because it creates daily communication between you and your Creator, not through formal words alone, but through the movement of your heart. Reflection is a form of prayer even without speech. As the sky darkens and the light fades, your heart is invited to release the burdens of the day. Some burdens you carried knowingly, others unknowingly. Some were heavy with emotion, others were subtle yet draining. Evening gives you a chance to place those burdens down. It gives you a chance to hand them to Allah. It gives you a chance to breathe with sincerity. When you enter the night with a heart that has returned to Allah, you enter with peace. And peace is the greatest gift a soul can carry. Evening continues to whisper its truth. This moment is for you. This moment is for your soul. This moment is for your return. It is a checkpoint not simply to measure your deeds, but to reawaken your heart, to bring you back to what matters, to remind you that tomorrow is not promised, to teach you that today is a gift you must reflect upon before it slips away. The believer who embraces this divine checkpoint grows in wisdom, in softness, in strength, in connection. They do not allow the day to end in heedlessness. They do not allow their heart to sleep without reflection. They do not allow the night to fall before they return to Allah. And so evening stands as one of the greatest mercies in your life, a checkpoint that is gentle yet transformative, a checkpoint that invites without force, a checkpoint that awakens without overwhelming, a checkpoint that holds the power to reshape your relationship with Allah one day at a time, one sunset at a time, one return at a time. Sleeping early symbolizes spiritual forgetfulness. Staying awake is staying conscious of purpose. This truth reaches deeper than the surface of physical rest. It is not a commentary on the body's need for sleep, but on the soul's need for awareness. Heedlessness is the greatest sleep of all, far heavier than the closing of physical eyes. It is the kind of sleep where the heart becomes numb to its purpose, unaware of its journey, detached from its creator. To sleep before evening, in the spiritual sense, is to allow the heart to drift into forgetfulness long before the body lies down. It is to surrender one of the most sacred windows of reflection. But to resist that sleep, to stay spiritually awake until the day has completed its course, is to breathe meaning into every moment Allah has given you. It is to live your purpose consciously rather than passively drifting through life. Life has a way of lulling people into a kind of spiritual drowsiness. The routine of daily tasks, the demands of work, the distractions of the world, the noise that fills the mind, all of these slowly dim the inner light unless the believer intentionally keeps it awake. Heedlessness does not arrive suddenly. It arrives gradually, quietly, softly, without your awareness. It enters when you stop noticing your blessings, stop guarding your intentions, stop questioning your direction, stop remembering Allah. That is the sleep of the heart. And this sleep often begins long before the body grows tired. It is possible to be physically awake and spiritually unconscious. It is possible to move, speak, work, interact, and yet feel nothing inside. That is the danger this principle warns against. Staying spiritually awake until evening means refusing to let the day end in forgetfulness. It means refusing to lay your head down while your heart is still asleep. It is a commitment to consciousness, to awareness, to depth. It is choosing to engage with your life instead of letting it pass you by. It is choosing to walk intentionally instead of wandering aimlessly. It is choosing to look at your heart before Allah looks at it. The believer understands that physical sleep is necessary, but spiritual sleep is dangerous. Physical sleep restores the body. Spiritual sleep destroys the soul. And evening is the moment where these two paths separate. You either fall into heedlessness or rise into awareness. Sleeping early symbolizes spiritual forgetfulness because it reflects a lack of reflection. A person who sleeps before evening without examining their heart often lives in a state of emotional and spiritual autopilot. They move from one day to the next without understanding themselves, without understanding their journey, without understanding their relationship with Allah. Life becomes a blur, a repetition, a cycle stripped of meaning. But the believer who stays awake inwardly, refuses to let their day slip through their fingers without holding it. examining it, learning from it, and offering it back to Allah. This state of wakefulness is not physical. It is spiritual vibrance. It is the consciousness of someone who knows that every day is a trust and every evening is an evaluation of that trust. To stay spiritually awake until evening is to understand that the heart must not be left unguarded.